Well, greetings students. I'm really excited about this presentation. In History 1181, we study India and China a lot, and we should. These are very important nations, but a lot of other important countries are left out, like Indonesia, the Philippines, Brazil, and Japan. These significant nations are barely mentioned. But there's only so much time in the semester, so when the syllabus directs you to important nations like Turkey or Iran, I spring into action. The whole point of this video is for you to be able to answer the question, why is Iran important? Iran's a pivotal nation and has been so since the dawn of time. When many Westerners think of Iran, they think of a hardline theocracy that's determined to develop nuclear weapons, an aggressive Shia state that wants to be the most important Muslim nation. Unfortunately, many Westerners could tell you little about Iranian history prior to the Islamic Revolution in 1979. This perspective is terribly limiting and dangerous. The Persian Empire was one of antiquity's great ones. They struggled mightily with ancient Greece and later the Byzantines for control of the eastern Mediterranean area, which we would call today the Middle East. Islam came to Iran in the 630s. The area was quickly overwhelmed by the supremely inspired Muslim soldiers after the Prophet's death. Now, your text deals with the Safavid dynasty, Iran embracing Shia Islam, and the leader Ismail in detail. Hence, I'm going to skip over that, but please understand that you're still responsible for that information. I want to talk about the fascinating history of Iran after this time period. I'm going to fast forward all the way up to the 19th century, the 1800s. This was a time period when the world was adapting rapidly to the Industrial Revolution. The European nations had an advantage, and one European nation, Russia, was bound and determined to expand in areas that were traditionally assigned to the Persian Empire. The northern part of Iran became victim to Russian expansion. The Russians were successful in their quest, and this created a lot of political instability in Iran. And what one sees by the emergence of the 20th century, the early 1900s, is the emergence of the Pahlavi dynasty. And much like Ataturk in neighboring Turkey, the Pahlavi Shahs, Shah is just another word for ruler or king, would be determined to modernize and industrialize Iran along Western lines. In 1909, oil was discovered in vast quantities in Iran. The British swooped in and set up the massive Anglo-Iranian Oil Company. The government of Iran, in their enthusiasm for this new, incredible source of revenue, agreed to a partnership that was incredibly lopsided. Iran would only realize 16% of the profits from their own resource. The British would take 84%. This arrangement fostered an animosity to Western nations and their motives that's still very prevalent in Iran. In the early 1950s, Iranian resentment over Western oil exploitation would lead to the election of a prime minister called Mohammad Mossadegh. Mossadegh had one goal: nationalize the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company. In other words, the government was just going to take it over and they're going to keep all the profits. Britain, as you may have guessed, freaked out. Unfortunately, so did the United States. 1950s was in the heart of the Cold War. If this nationalization was allowed to continue, Iran would fall into the Soviet orbit, into Soviet control. And then the domino theory would play out throughout the Middle East, and this would deprive the West, Western Europe and the United States, of a huge portion of the oil it consumes. So this threat to nationalize the Iranian Oil Company by this guy called Mohammad Mossadegh was seen as a major threat, both in the UK and in the United States. Now, you may see Iranian students sometimes demonstrating against the United States, and you might say, well, where did this come from? Here's a big source of that anger. In 1953, the CIA, Central Intelligence Agency, covert organization here in the United States, in league with British intelligence, launched Operation Ajax, in which they co-opted media sources inside of Iran, hired protesters, and bribed politicians and soldiers to turn against Mossadegh. This was very successful. Mossadegh was labeled a traitor in the media. The Iranian military arrested Mossadegh, and then the Shah, Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, made a strong alliance with the United States. The U.S. promised bundles of Western economic military aid if he promised not to nationalize the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company and remain firm in his anti-Soviet stance, stay on the side of NATO. What resulted was a very repressive Iranian regime. Many Iranians never forgot the sack of the very popular Prime Minister Mohammad Mossadegh. Many devout Muslims were also sickened by the slavish pro-Western behavior of the Shah and his beautiful wife, who seemed determined to be a European. She certainly did not carry herself as a humble Muslim woman. The Anglo-Iranian Oil Company, in a public relations move in 1954, changed its name to BP, British Petroleum. I'm sure most of us have patronized a BP in our existence. Throughout the 1950s and 60s, the Shah instituted something called the White Revolution, an attempt to modernize the nation. Many devout Muslims, however, again were sickened by the pro-Western nature of this revolution. And so this situation continued until the 1970s, the late 1970s, when economic upheavals created shocks to the energy sector throughout the world. One man, Ayatollah Khomeini, advocated the destruction of the immoral Shah and his unholy alliance with the West. In 1979, the Iranian Revolution forced the Shah into exile and ushered in the Islamic State. Later in that year, enthusiastic students stormed the U.S. Embassy and took diplomats hostage. The U.S. severed diplomatic relations as a result. The hostage crisis, which lasted over 400 days, did much to doom the re-election hopes of Jimmy Carter and guarantee the presidency of Ronald Reagan. Since the 1980s, the U.S. and Iran have been at odds. There are only 3 nations in the world the United States does not have diplomatic relations with. One is Iran, the other is North Korea, and the other is this small country on the Indian subcontinent called Bhutan. But that's not an animosity thing. They just don't do the diplomacy thing. Since Iran became an Islamic state in 1979, it's battled Saudi Arabia for dominance in the Middle East. After the revolution, Iran became aggressively anti-Israeli, backing Hezbollah militants in neighboring Lebanon. Iran has also sought to fill the power void created by the U.S. invasion of Iraq in 2003. Iraqi's population is 60% Shia. But Iran's Shia nature is a permanent separating factor in the Islamic world, which is up to 90% Sunni Muslims. Interestingly enough, Iran's Shia nature makes it a natural ally of the West against ISIS, which is Sunni. Currently, Iran is seeking to create nukes, which is a major source of tension it has with the West. Please pay attention to this country. You're going to hear a lot about Iran in the coming years.